In this particular case, I showed it to my agent, who had been my agent for some 18 years at that point. And he read my presentation.
Gilligan's Island might look like a light-hearted comedy about 7 castaways stuck on a deserted island, but beneath the slapstick humor and catchy theme song, the show was filled with clever details, hidden meanings, and subtle touches that many viewers missed. Running from 1964 to 1967, it became one of the most beloved sitcoms in television history, replayed endlessly in reruns and still remembered by fans today. But behind its silly premise of never-ending failed rescue attempts, the show's creators tucked away small secrets, symbolic choices, and clever tricks that revealed just how much thought went into every episode. From the hidden messages in the characters' clothing, to the way the professor's inventions subtly commented on human ingenuity, to surprising guest stars and production quirks that most audiences never noticed, Gilligan's Island is a treasure chest of small details that reward careful rewatching. Even the island itself, seemingly a simple backdrop, carried clues and design elements that hinted at deeper themes of survival, society, and satire. Today, we'll uncover the tiny details you probably missed, things that make Gilligan's Island far more than just a goofy sitcom. Whether you grew up watching it or discovered it years later, these hidden gems prove that the show had layers of meaning behind the laughs. So sit back, grab a coconut, and get ready to revisit the island with fresh eyes. You may never see Gilligan and the gang the same way again. At first glance, Gilligan's Island seems like a simple sitcom about 7 stranded people, but creator Sherwood Schwartz actually designed the characters with deeper meaning in mind. Each castaway wasn't just a random personality. They were symbolic representations of different aspects of American society in the 1960s. Take Gilligan himself. Played by Bob Denver, Gilligan was clumsy, lovable, and often the reason rescue attempts failed. But Schwartz once hinted that Gilligan symbolized the childlike innocence of humanity. His constant mistakes weren't malicious. They reminded audiences that people, no matter how well-meaning, are imperfect. In a way, Gilligan represented the part of society that is naive but ultimately good-hearted. The skipper, portrayed by Alan Hale Jr., was more than just the big, tough leader of the SS Minnow. He stood for authority, discipline, and protection. His fatherly role over Gilligan reflected the balance between responsibility and frustration that leaders often face. His character suggested that while authority is important, it is also vulnerable to the same flaws as everyone else. Then there was the professor, Russell Johnson's brilliant but stranded intellectual. Many fans joked about how he could build radios, washing machines, and all sorts of gadgets from coconuts, but couldn't fix the hole in the boat. Yet, beneath the humor, the professor symbolized science and human innovation. His presence on the island was a commentary on how knowledge can solve many problems. But sometimes even the smartest minds cannot fix the simplest of issues. The millionaire, Thurston Howell III, and his wife Lovey represented wealth and privilege. Despite being trapped on a deserted island, they still clung to their social class and materialism. Their insistence on bringing luggage, money, and jewelry to an uninhabited island symbolized the absurdity of wealth when survival is at stake. It was a satirical jab at how some people cannot let go of societal roles, even when those roles mean nothing. Mary Ann and Ginger also carried symbolic weight. Mary Ann, the girl next door from Kansas, represented wholesome American values, kindness, loyalty, and humility. Audiences often debated Mary Ann or Ginger, but the truth was that Mary Ann's role was designed to reflect the heart of everyday America. In contrast, Ginger, the glamorous movie star, embodied fame, vanity, and allure. Her obsession with appearances highlighted the growing fascination with celebrity culture during the 1960s. What many fans don't realize is that Schwartz intentionally put these archetypes together to create a microcosm of society. Each character wasn't just a comic stereotype. They were carefully crafted pieces of a bigger picture. Stranded together, they represented how different social classes, professions, and personalities might function when stripped of the real-world structure. Even more fascinating, some critics later suggested that the 7 castaways symbolized the 7 deadly sins, Gilligan as sloth, the skipper as wrath, the professor as pride, Howell as greed, Lovey as envy, Ginger as lust, and Mary Ann as innocence. Or, in some interpretations, gluttony. Whether Schwartz intended this or not, the theory added yet another layer to the show's meaning, transforming what looked like a silly sitcom into a story filled with hidden allegory. These symbolic roles gave Gilligan's Island unexpected depth. It wasn't just slapstick comedy. It was social commentary dressed in coconuts and palm trees. Viewers may not have consciously noticed, but they felt the balance of these characters, and that's part of what kept the show engaging long after its 3-season run. When most people think of Gilligan's Island, they picture light-hearted comedy, slapstick routines, and the quirky interactions of 7 castaways stuck on a deserted island. But beneath the coconut radios and bamboo huts, the show contained subtle messages, cultural references, and symbolic undertones that many viewers completely missed. These small details made the series far more layered than it appeared, and looking back today, they reveal that Gilligan's Island was much more than a silly sitcom. It was also a mirror of society in the 1960s. One of the most fascinating details lies in how each castaway wasn't just a character but a symbol of an entire segment of American culture. Gilligan, the clumsy first mate, represented the average person, the well-meaning but often misguided everyman who stumbled through life. The skipper stood in as authority, a father figure who tried to lead but often failed due to his temper or overconfidence. The professor embodied science and intellect, using logic and resourcefulness to create gadgets, but ironically never able to fix the boat to get them home. Thurston Howell III and his wife Lovey represented the wealthy elite, whose riches were useless on a deserted island. Meanwhile, Ginger symbolized Hollywood glamour, while Mary Ann represented wholesome, small-town American values. Together, these characters reflected a miniature version of society itself, one where wealth, brains, beauty, and authority all had their place, but none could solve every problem. Another subtle detail that often went unnoticed was the way props were used throughout the show. The castaways were constantly building items out of coconuts, bamboo, and vines, radios, washing machines, and even air conditioners. While these creations were used as comic relief, they also highlighted the human drive for innovation. The message was clear. When faced with hardship, people will always find ways to adapt, no matter how absurd the circumstances. Some fans even believe this was a quiet nod to the American spirit of resilience during the 1960s, when society faced political, social, and technological upheaval. Hidden cultural and political references also made their way into episodes, though many were disguised as jokes. For instance, during the height of the Cold War, the show subtly touched on America's anxieties about foreign powers. In one storyline, a crate of supplies washed ashore, symbolizing both the hope and the dependence tied to global trade and aid. In another, the arrival of strange visitors on the island reflected fears of outside influence. These references were never heavy-handed, but they added layers of meaning for viewers paying close attention. Even the famous theme song carried symbolism that fans often overlooked. The phrase, "a 3-hour tour," sounded simple enough, but it carried tragic irony. What was meant to be an ordinary afternoon adventure turned into a lifelong consequence. This irony captured the unpredictable nature of life itself, how quickly things can go wrong, and how people must adapt when faced with the unexpected. The upbeat tone of the theme song disguised this underlying sadness, but in retrospect, it's one of the show's cleverest details. Another overlooked element was the way the castaways' lives on the island echoed real-world struggles with isolation and community. In a way, the island was a microcosm of civilization. The characters constantly battled between working together for survival and falling into conflict due to their personalities, egos, and desires. This reflected broader themes of human society, how people depend on one another, yet often let pride or self-interest get in the way. Some fans have also pointed out biblical and mythological undertones in the series. The island itself, unreachable and mysterious, symbolized both paradise and purgatory. The characters, trapped together, resembled figures in morality tales, each representing a human flaw or strength. Gilligan, with his constant blunders, sometimes even played the role of a trickster figure, whose mistakes drove the story forward, but also forced the group to confront their struggles. What makes these subtle references so remarkable is that they were hidden under layers of comedy. Audiences in the 1960s tuned in for laughs, but unknowingly absorbed deeper cultural commentary. From class differences to Cold War anxieties, from human ingenuity to societal balance, Gilligan's Island was quietly telling a story about the world beyond the television screen. In the end, the hidden symbolism and cultural references prove that Gilligan's Island was never just a silly comedy about people stuck on an island. It was a show that reflected its time, offered commentary on society, and left behind clever details that continue to fascinate fans decades later. For those who look closely, the series reveals far more than it initially lets on. While Gilligan's Island may have seemed like a simple sitcom filled with slapstick humor and tropical mishaps, the production itself was filled with fascinating details that most fans never noticed. Behind the cameras, the show's creators and cast dealt with challenges, surprising decisions, and small details that only reveal themselves when looking closer. These behind-the-scenes secrets not only shaped the series, but also added hidden depth to what many considered just a lighthearted comedy. One of the most overlooked aspects of the show was the filming location. Although the series was supposed to be set on a deserted tropical island, much of the filming actually took place in California. The lagoon scenes were shot on a CBS lot in Studio City, where a man-made lagoon was constructed specifically for the show. While it looked exotic on screen, in reality, it sat just a few yards away from busy city streets. Crew members often had to work around noise from cars and planes flying overhead, making filming difficult. Sometimes, if you watch closely, you can even spot city buildings in the far background, breaking the illusion of isolation. Another detail fans often missed was how the costumes reflected more than just character traits. They also created logistical headaches. The millionaire couple, Thurston and Lovey Howell, always appeared in glamorous outfits, even though the group was stranded on an island. This was a running gag, but it also symbolized wealth's detachment from reality. However, keeping their clothing pristine was a constant challenge for the costume department. Meanwhile, Ginger's sparkling gowns were impractical for survival, but necessary to reinforce her image as Hollywood's glamorous star. Mary Ann's gingham dress, on the other hand, was designed to highlight her girl-next-door innocence. These costumes became iconic, but their impracticality often made filming uncomfortable for the actors under hot studio lights. Casting also carried its own share of hidden stories. Dawn Wells, who played Mary Ann, later revealed that the cast felt underappreciated during the show's run. While audiences loved them, network executives often dismissed Gilligan's Island as lowbrow entertainment. This attitude carried into how the cast was compensated. Many were paid standard television salaries at the time, without residuals that would have made them wealthy later. As reruns became massively popular in the decades that followed, the lack of residuals left the cast frustrated, with some admitting they earned very little from one of the most replayed shows in television history. Another overlooked production detail lies in the professor's inventions. Fans always joked about how he could build a working radio from coconuts, but couldn't fix the boat to leave the island. However, the props were carefully designed to look functional. The writers even consulted with technical experts to make sure the invention seemed at least vaguely believable. This attention to detail gave the show its charm. Viewers could suspend disbelief because the props felt grounded, even in their absurdity. Music also played a critical role behind the scenes. The theme song, one of the most recognizable in TV history, went through multiple changes. Early versions of the song didn't even mention the Professor and Mary Ann by name, grouping them into the line, "The Rest." It was only after fans complained that the lyrics were updated to include both characters individually, showing how audience feedback directly shaped the final product. This small adjustment made a lasting impact, as the theme song became one of the most beloved elements of the series. Filming conditions added their own unique challenges. The man-made lagoon was filled with water that over time became dirty and stagnant. Cast members often joked about how unpleasant it was to film in, and Dawn Wells even claimed that she developed health issues from spending so much time in the murky water. The hot California sun also made wearing heavy costumes or makeup uncomfortable, particularly for Tina Louise, who played Ginger. Despite these difficulties, the actors rarely complained on set, knowing the show was connecting with audiences. Perhaps the most surprising production detail is how close the show came to being canceled earlier than it was. After only 3 seasons, CBS abruptly ended the series despite its popularity, choosing instead to give that time slot to Gunsmoke. This decision shocked both fans and cast members, leaving the show with no true finale. For decades, viewers were left wondering if the castaways ever escaped, making the series one of television's most famous unfinished stories. These behind-the-scenes details, ranging from hidden filming challenges to overlooked costume symbolism, show that Gilligan's Island was far from a simple comedy. Every choice, whether in casting, props, or production design, contributed to its lasting charm. The show might have seemed light and carefree on screen, but behind the scenes, it was a carefully constructed effort filled with creativity, struggles, and small secrets that still fascinate fans today. Decades after its original broadcast, Gilligan's Island remains one of television's most recognizable and enduring comedies. At first glance, it may seem like just a silly sitcom about 7 castaways trapped on an island, but the small details hidden throughout the series, its symbolism, character dynamics, production quirks, and subtle social commentary are what gave it lasting cultural weight. These overlooked aspects have kept fans talking for generations, ensuring that the show's legacy goes far beyond its short 3-season run. One of the most significant parts of its legacy is how the characters themselves became archetypes. Each castaway represented something bigger than themselves: wealth, authority, intelligence, glamour, innocence, or the average person. Over time, these archetypes became embedded in popular culture. People still compare real-world personalities to Gilligan or the skipper, or debate whether they prefer Ginger or Mary Ann. The simplicity of the characters made them timeless, but the symbolic layers behind them made them meaningful. In this way, Gilligan's Island became more than just entertainment. It became a cultural shorthand for human behavior and society. The subtle cultural commentary hidden in the show also helped it remain relevant. By poking fun at class differences, political anxieties, and human flaws, Gilligan's Island became a light-hearted reflection of the world in the 1960s. What's fascinating is that much of this commentary still applies today. The idea of wealth being useless in survival situations, the tension between authority and individuality, and the reliance on science that can't solve every problem, all these themes continue to resonate in modern society. Viewers who revisit the show now often find new meanings in old episodes, which explains why reruns have stayed popular for decades. Another overlooked but powerful legacy lies in the show's influence on later television. Many sitcoms that followed borrowed the formula of isolating a small group of characters and exploring their interactions. Shows like Friends, The Office, and even Survivor in the reality TV genre echo Gilligan's Island's structure of diverse personalities stuck in a single setting. Even cartoons like The Simpsons and Family Guy have parodied the show, showing how deeply it has embedded itself in entertainment history. The theme song is another enduring piece of the legacy. Few television shows have theme songs as instantly recognizable as Gilligan's Island. The catchy tune has been referenced in films, commercials, and even political campaigns. It not only defined the series but also became part of American pop culture identity. The fact that the song had to be updated to include the Professor and Mary Ann also highlights the way fans shaped the series, a rare example of audience influence in 1960s television beyond pop culture. The show has also inspired academic discussion. Scholars have analyzed the series for its symbolic representation of society, its subtle satire of politics, and its commentary on human nature. For example, some have argued that the island functions as a metaphor for America itself, seemingly isolated, resourceful, but constantly struggling with internal divisions. Others interpret it as a cautionary tale about humanity's inability to work together to solve problems, no matter how much intelligence or wealth is present. These deeper readings show that the small, overlooked details carried meanings far greater than the writers may have even intended. Fans, too, have kept the legacy alive by obsessing over these details. Discussions about how the professor could build gadgets but not repair the boat, or how Ginger managed to keep her glamorous outfits pristine, remain popular topics among viewers. These unanswered questions have become part of the charm, sparking debates that keep the show relevant across generations. The fact that audiences continue to notice new details, even 60 years later, proves how richly layered the series truly was. Perhaps the most touching aspect of Gilligan's Island's legacy is the sense of nostalgia it brings. For many viewers, the show represents a simpler time in television, before gritty dramas and complex storylines, when sitcoms offered light-hearted escapes from the stresses of the real world. Yet at the same time, the overlooked details gave it enough depth to keep people thinking long after the credits rolled. This balance